All right, this is Carbon County Commissioner Chris Lukasevich. I'm just getting ready to start here. I had about 10 or 15 minutes, getting within an hour or two at the end of the day, so I thought I'd come together and kind of make some comments in regards to the state or the county event that took place this morning at Blue Mountain Resort. Up there at the ski resort up on top of the hill, right? Out just outside of Palmerton, in Little Gap. So I'm just kind of moving things around here a little bit, and then I'm going to have a few minutes, some comments, or really it's my perception on the state of the quote-unquote the county. And I think most people know when I'm speaking about the state of the county, I'm talking about county with a capital C, and that's referring to the government of Carbon County. So I just got one or two more pushes here, and then I'm going to go ahead and get started on this beautiful, low 80 degree sunny day here in Jim Thorpe, the seat of Carbon County. And again, I'm Carbon County Commissioner Chris Lukasevich, coming to you late in the afternoon from 2 Hazard Square here in my office in the Carbon County Administration building. And so what I wanted to do after sitting through, I probably went from about 8 o'clock this morning, had a little bit of a social coffee and stuff till 8:30, then till about 10:30. After sitting about 2 hours of perceptions on the state of the county, had LVHN, St. Luke's, Representative Dan Muser, a representative from Doyle Heffley's office, had one of my colleagues speak, Commissioner Notstein, had the director of Carbon County Technical Institute speak too, which was a very passionate, very good conversation or information that he presented. Matter of fact, I found him to be the most interesting and most enlightening, and partly maybe that was due to because I had the opportunity to tour both the new St. Luke's, which was about 8 months ago when that opened, and then the new LVHN hospital, and attend those openings. So I was pretty familiar with what St. Luke's and LVHN were doing here in Carbon County, which is just incredible. Imagine within a few miles of each other, we have 2 state-of-the-art hospitals opening within our county. Incredible, and I suspect there is nothing like it that has occurred in any other of the 3,006 counties in the United States of America, at least this year, to have such 2 state-of-the-art facilities open in such a short period of time. So let me talk about a perspective on the state of the county. For me, there are 2 truths when it comes to writing for, speaking to, or otherwise presenting to senior executives or senior decision makers, like those who were present this morning at Blue Mountain during the state of the county, right? And what I learned from my own briefings and presentations to senior leaders and executives: 1, put the bottom line up front, the bluff as it's referred to, and don't tell them what they want to hear. Tell them what they need to hear. And I'm passionately assertive, so you would expect nothing else from me than putting the bottom line up front and telling you or any individual what they need to hear, not what they necessarily want to hear. And a big difference. I often repeat this, but too few folks do understand. County commissioners do not run Carbon County. County commissioners run county government. That is, the Board of Commissioners manages and administers what is actually about 3/5 of quote-unquote what we believe or perceive to be county government. We definitely don't control the more than 64,000 residents living within this 387 square miles, subdivided into 23 lower political subdivisions that we refer to as municipalities, right? Townships and boroughs. So keep that in mind. Again, county commissioners don't run the county, we run county government. And I tend to refer to county government as the county, capital C. Now, if I were to place an overall grade on the county government, and its provisioning of services, I'd have no hesitation in saying a C minus, B plus. However, there are stellar performers all along that dotted landscape of county government with varying degrees of effectiveness, efficiency, responsiveness, and customer satisfaction. And I'm going to get back to that here in a little bit. But sticking with the bottom line up front, I thought I'd give kind of insider's perspective of what I felt within the last 12 months for the most part, the most notable decisions made by this board of commissioners. Because keep in mind, the decisions we make more than anything else impact the state of county government, right? Comes decisions, comes repercussions, or some type of effect, right? I think not necessarily in order of priority or significance, but I think divesting of the county railroad, sale of the county railroad, it was an incredible liability. We did have some derailments even recently prior to the sale, had one in Nesquehoning. Fortunate no one was injured. It was no question, excuse me, that the county government didn't have the expertise to monetize the railroad. We owned it for decades, and literally $50,000 or $60,000 a year were coming in off that railroad. Wasn't even enough to maintain it. Critically important that has occurred in the last year was the hiring of some now seemingly indispensable leaders. And I say leaders because I really think we've been so fortunate. The hiring of the new warden, hiring of a new public defender, parking administrator, and going back a little bit further, the hiring of the children and youth director. We selected excellent leaders, and in the prison, public defender's office, parking, children and youth services, I sincerely and honestly believe we have grown leaps and bounds in our ability to provide our required services, right, in those realms. And it's all because of selecting the right leaders, not simply selecting administrators or managers, but true leaders in those four offices. And tying back into the prison, I would say, we recently contracted with Prime Care. Up until really just about 4 to 5 weeks ago, we were actually managing, for the most part, our own prison medical. What a liability, what a challenge that was. So I think the selection of Prime Care to manage our medical services at a prison, extremely important, extremely prudent decision. And lastly, an investment that we have made in our individuals, continuing to support training and education of our employees. I do not recall in the past 12 months any request for training or education coming across my desk or my colleagues that was not approved. From time to time there are always some questions maybe about the cost and that, but at the end of the day, I don't recall turning down an opportunity for an employee to attend training, be it in person or virtual. And this included, I think, some great leadership training. Leadership Carbon, which is run and managed by the Carbon Chamber and Economic Development Corporation. So right here, locally, all the way to NACO's, National Association of Counties, 12-week virtual leadership academy, which Colton Powell, former Secretary of State, former Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff, plays an integral role in that leadership academy. So we're continuing to invest. So those are the kind of the four notable decisions that have had notable impact over the last 12 months and will continue into the future. So shortcomings, right? And you know, I am not averse to pointing out shortcomings and deficiencies, be it my own or in the organization in which I now serve and work. The lack of a county government strategic plan. Carbon County, the government, it has no vision, has no clear purpose, no method, lines of effort, no end state. And there's no question that without a strategic vision, without an operational design for my military friends, that purpose, method, end state, without that, you are rudderless, right? You're in a constant reactive mode. And that's what we are here in county government. There is no forward thinking, there is no forward planning. And in that light, associated with that, is we continue to live and operate on a one-year budget plan, right? So in about August, September, we start the budget process for 2023. We'll finish it by Thanksgiving, publish it, and in December, before the end, December 31st, I believe it is, we have to have an approved budget. Doesn't have to be a balanced budget, but we have to have an approved budget. But that's it. So we're planning for 2023, but we're not looking out to 2024, 2025, 2026. And that is simple forecasting that can be done, right? You take estimates of increasing costs, the CPI, how much that's going to go up, the fact that certain vehicles will reach the end of its life cycle during that 4-year period, right? You can get a pretty accurate understanding of where your budget is going. And that would help at least start shaping the environment, informing the environment about maybe potential tax increases, or maybe ways you can continue to trim the budget or hold back some of the adverse impacts of, for example, inflation. But again, there's no forward thinking. So a big issue over the past 12 months. Grateful leadership. A friend of mine, Judy, who lives just up the street in the Purple House, wrote books on the power of acknowledgement and grateful leadership, right? Recognizing individuals, from a pat on the back to public pronouncements. I think we lack in county government grateful leadership. We don't publicly recognize individual achievement internal to county government. When it comes to us, we tend to highlight it. But we're not taking the initiative to acknowledge the great work that is being done in so many of the departments that fall under the Board of Commissioners, in the row offices, and in the courts. And lastly, and some people would question this, I don't hesitate to say it, the failed decision that is literally going to cost you, your children, my children, from now for decades to come. And that was the failure to follow through with the purchase of 410 Center Avenue in Jim Thorpe, right, the former school district office. This will be the I told you so moment for me. And it's already playing out, and I'm watching it unfold weekly. So keep that in mind, the I told you so. Failure to purchase 410 Center Avenue. You wait till the October, January, so this October, November, December, January time period, when numbers start coming in for the purchase of 525 Iron Street, and then for the courthouse renovations. And we'll be thinking about the actions we could have taken this year that would have significantly reduced the costs associated with those capital projects. More to come. So, going forward, right, because that's also part of state of the county. What occurred in the past 12 months, good and bad. Going forward, what do we need to do? We either need to invest or divest Packard and Yards. Spent over 3 years trying to assess the viability of a solar farm, alternative energy production down there. Actually, from a solar energy production suitability, it's actually really, really good. And multiple companies were extremely interested. However, there's this little event that occurred about 175 years ago, the Great Freshet of like 1846, which wiped out one of the little villages down there, that has ensured in perpetuity it'll be a special flood hazard area. So even though we know they tend to put them up on stilts, for no better word, these solar panels, it's not worth the risk and liability for these companies. My other option would be, and it's kind of twofold. One, I would not mind seeing it assumed or annexed into Mock Chunk Lake Park and become a riverside potential RV park, or even a more recreational focused park for the county and managed by the county. In addition, like the previous board, willingness to convey 27 acres of Packard and yards of about 70 acres to Lehighton, I would advocate and support for conveying a parcel, 5, 10 acres, to the borough of Jim Thorpe. Sell it to them for $1 and allow them to create all this parking that they believe and is so desperately needed to support tourists, visitors to Jim Thorpe. So again, and I don't think my colleagues could resist, right? They're willing to give 27 acres to Jim Thorpe, 27 acres to Lehighton. I want to give 5 to 7, even 10 acres to Jim Thorpe. Let them set up a parking lot down there and create a concessionaire or a vendor to do shuttle services on all those weekends where the flow of traffic here is very challenging and creates difficulties, right? But again, if we can't do that, we need to figure out how can we sell it, how can we get rid of Packard and Yard. Also, we need to hold our internet service providers accountable to ensure that once our broadband study comes out in July or early August, that in the next 12 to 24 months, there are no or underserved areas or residents in Carbon County for broadband, right? We gotta get the internet, the cable, the connectivity, the fiber out to those remaining spots. And we need to do it quickly to ensure there's access to telework, telemedicine, teleeducation. 2 other things in the next 12 to 18 months, and I'll say 12 to 18 because that would be the end of my first term. Need to take the salary study, which should be hopefully concluding in the next 3 or 4 months. We said we needed it by August. Take that what's called the salary. It's really a salary benefits entitlement, and combine that with what the Board of Commissioners agreed upon last January was to a work climate survey of all county employees. Bring those 2 together and figure out how we can better recruit and retain county employees. And lastly, because the organizational structure of county code governments, such as here in Carbon County, is such a soup sandwich. Dysfunctional organizational structure. I truly believe we need a ballot measure to look at the establishment of a government study commission to consider if another form of organizational structure of county government is not better than this 3-person commissioners, both executive and legislative body combined, which of course leaves no true system of checks and balances where you have a legislative and an executive branch. And I'm talking home rule. We really need to study it. A lot of our problems don't come from challenging employees, because we have a lot of great employees. It comes from an organizational structure which just does not facilitate or create the conditions structurally, decision-making wise, for effective, efficient provisioning of county services. So that's my bottom line up front, which is a pretty long one, but that's not necessarily what you want to hear, but it's what you need to hear. So I could walk off at this moment fully knowing the essentials have been delivered. But with that said, it's important for us to recognize that the county government, referring primarily to the departments under the Board of Commissioners, overall serves the county residents quite well. And there's probably 4 demographic groups to which we provide significant focus and attention. That would be the senior citizens, right? We have our 5 senior centers. We have carbon transit. We have a meals program. Then there's the veterans with our county veteran service officer, who's the bridge between service members and families of service members who are back into civilian life, right? That bridge between them and benefits they earned. Then there's the abused or vulnerable children who are protected by the actions of Children and Youth Services. And yes, another focus group are the inmates, the 200 or so that are up in our prison. So that's kind of 4 subgroups or demographics of the 64,000 residents whose special emphasis is focused on. The county does meet its obligations to these populations actually quite well. And this is often unseen and maybe overshadowed by maybe some of the regular touch points that county government has with its citizens, such as twice annual running of elections. Also, April, May, when the taxes for the county are published, or maybe even times when you have to dial 911, right? And you may not realize this, but you're talking to county employees up at the 911 center on the Broad Mountain. We do though have issues that inhibit the providing of excellence in services to residents. I would say one is external to the county and one is internal to the county, being county government. The external one to county government that I'm referencing is citizens' apathy, lack of knowledge or disinterest in how county government is structured, functions, its codified duties and responsibilities, right? And the internal issue I think that really hampers us is the structure of county government. It's a Harrisburg directed, one size fits all county cookie cutter approach. A one size fits all approach, which even 3 of our neighboring counties, Lehigh, Luzerne, Northampton, have discarded. Since counties were given the right to adopt home rule 50 years ago this past April. So let me tackle maybe the lack of knowledge in county government structure together quickly as we go to wind up here in the next 5 minutes or so. Unlike state and federal levels, as I mentioned, there's no separate executive and legislative branches in county government. Therefore, it lacks a system of checks and balances, for both powers are invested in this one body, right? 3 commissioners. One might argue that the only saving grace is the dysfunctional organizational structure dictated by the county code, that works completely contrary to the concept of unity of effort, unity of leadership. So unity of effort, unity of leadership is so important in tackling difficult tasks. You don't have that in a county code of form of government. And I think many of you have heard this from me before, because the county is like, more or less 3 branches of the U.S. military without the Goldwater Nichols Act of 1986, right? So 3 branches, just over 400 employees providing varying degrees of citizen services, which have varying degrees of autonomy, and further fractured these 3 branches by 4 collective bargaining units and 1 quasi-collective bargaining unit, right? You have the Board of Commissioners and the 21 departments, about 240 employees under its authorities. Uh, you have two unions, ASME's Teamsters, uh, Correction Sergeants Memorandum Agreement, which is that quasi one. Then you have this other silo, which are the 9 row offices: Prothonotary, Clerk of Courts, Recorder of Deeds, Coroner, DA, etc. Uh, about 90 employees, and then finally the judiciary or the courts, about 72 employees, so just over 400 employees. So these latter two branches, right, the row offices and the judiciary or courts, they have this level of independence when it comes to hiring, firing, and office management, right? These are often referred to as 1620s rights, rights which greatly really inhibit unity of effort and unity of leadership. Did you ever notice during a commissioners meeting that we actually present 2 personnel reports? One we approve, that is the personnel report for the departments, 21 departments that fall under the Board of Commissioners, and one we simply acknowledge. That is for the appointments of courts and row officer employees. It's also, here's another example of, Board of Commissioners, right? We can't require employees of the row offices or courts to submit annual personnel evaluations. Can't dictate dress policies. Guys have to wear, button-down shirts and ties every day. Heck, we can't even compel the courts to comply with Act 67. We can't compel them to participate in a work climate survey. Some may say, well, they're not the row officers, they're the rogue officers, But again, work climate survey, why wouldn't you want to participate in that? Why wouldn't you want your employees to participate in an anonymous work climate survey? I don't know, but what it'll do, you'll receive a cookie cutter email saying, 1620 authorities, we manage our personnel and we don't want to participate. So again, being selfish, not looking out for what's best for the greater good. Need unity of effort, unity of command, or unity of leadership. You don't get it when there's 3 branches and not a Goldwater-Nichols Act. So what happened? Goldwater-Nichols Act in 1986, right? Signed into law, brought our Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines into a joint environment, right? Clearly given the Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of Defense authorities to synchronize and coordinate the efforts of our branches of the military. That's what you need here in county government. I do have to admit, though, that the commissioners do have the sole authority for budget approval, signing contract, and set the hours of operations. And we do have a collective majority on the salary board, so we can significantly input, county employee salary, regardless, if they're under a row office or the courts. So there are stick and carrot options available. I haven't seen the carrot work well around here at all. But at the same time, I haven't seen sufficient use of the stick to compel compliance, to ensure unity of effort. I do remain totally convinced that unless the structure of county government is modified, more in line with private enterprise, right? CEO, COO, Chief Executive Officer, Chief Operating Officer, guided by a board of directors kind of concept. Unless we adopt an organizational structure, a hierarchy more like that, unless there are uniform and enforceable personnel policies and procedures, this county government will never maximize its potential to provide citizens excellence in services. It's just not going to happen. So again, for some, that may not be what you want to hear, but that is what you need to hear. County government is dysfunctional. It's dysfunctional by design, and it can only be fixed by redesign. So, well, I guess there's probably, this morning what I would have said, probably one last thought on this topic, which helps frame the problem with Carbon County government. And I probably would have done it in the form of a hypothetical question to these individuals, these senior executives, leaders in the business, the banking, the tourism industry here in Carbon County. I probably would ask them or state it, is there any organization or business leader in this room who believes that their entity, their business or organization would be more effective, efficient, profitable, or responsive to customers if he or she had to place decisions as mundane as dismissing a parking ticket to a vote? For all intent and purposes, that is how the Board of Commissioners operate. The Board of Commissioners operate. Efficient. Well, lastly, unquestionably, and I see it day in and day out, you have in county government some very extremely competent, creative, innovative, and committed public officials and employees who take great pride in their jobs and who are striving for excellence each and every day in county government. And we really should feel blessed and not allow the fact that we can always do better, because all organizations cannot allow that fact overshadow that there is very good things being done in regards to providing services to the residents of Carbon County. Wow, that would have been like a 15-minute discussion this morning if I would have had those comments available and had the opportunity to discuss this morning. So again, that is just a perspective on the state of the county with the capital C, county government. A lot of good going on, a lot of good that can go on better, more efficiently, more effectively, more responsively. Should we take a hard internal look at ourselves and adjust, become a learning organization? That is, adapt, adopt innovative techniques, opportunities that we see from others, other counties, private businesses. So this is Carbon County Commissioner Chris Lukasiewicz. I've been off the live streaming for a bit here. I'm trying to get Carbon Matters back up and running because that's been a couple months because I was trying to take a break, kind of rejuvenate, re-energize. And that is definitely occurring. It was good to kind of free up even just that one Thursday night a month. I was hoping to aspiring to get it started back up in June. I think that's going to push to July or August. Summer months are kind of for relaxing and chilling. I'd like to do that also, spend more time with Maggie and Molly than necessarily live streaming and discussing Carbon Matters. I can do that, during the formal workday. So this is Carbon County Commissioner Chris Lukasiewicz. I want to thank you for joining me. If there are any comments, post it. I'll go back tonight or tomorrow and I'll go ahead and reply to those. But bear in mind, you can always call me at 570-503-6780, 22 hours a day. That exception, 5:30 to 7:30 in the evening, right? That's Molly and Maggie time. A dinner bath for Molly, get her to bed at 7:30. So I tend to be very sensitive about what, if any, calls I take during that time. So Chris Lukasiewicz, 570-503-6780. Have a wonderful 4th of July. Recognize and appreciate what our forefathers have done for us. Take care.